Welcome back, everyone, to the cigar smoke filled back room. I am Doug with Tusk Consulting, tuskconsulting at gmail.com, tuskconsulting at gmail.com. If you're a pro gun Republican, drop me a line at that email address. We'll help you out. If you're not a pro gun Republican, be gone. In the ongoing video series about things that are not discussed enough in politics, or at least not discussed honestly enough, today we're going to be talking about tariffs specifically as they apply to the U.S. relationship with China. And before we get too far into the program, the cigar of the day is a broadleaf by Rocky Patel, and the bottle of the day is a Jameson Black Barrel. Had St. Patrick's Day here just a little bit ago, so needed to get an Irish whiskey. Hmm. Again, these are not sponsors to the program, but we could work on that. Now, let's talk about China and the relationship with the U.S. as it regards the tariffs and trade war thing going on right now. There's been a lot of conversation about this. And yes, tariffs are being levied against lots of countries, not just China. That's a much bigger conversation. But there's specific reasons to talk about China. The biggest, most obvious is that the US has the largest trade deficit with China. And so, and look, there's reasons for that, right? Some is based upon the demand of the American consumer. Some is based on the low cost of labor in China, a bunch of other factors. But in fact, this is as good a place as any to say there's a whole lot of history we got to talk about here. So, and I'm going to keep this history to the relatively recent past, most recent few decades. The Chinese Communist Party learned valuable lessons from the fall of the Soviet Union. They wanted to get the pros of capitalism without the cons. What they saw at the Soviet Union was that the perestroika and so forth, the openness that they engaged with the West, yes, it led to increased productivity. It led to people having more money, people, the standard of living rising, but also led to freedom of thought. And it led to people demanding something other than the totalitarian, authoritarian, communist regimes lording over them and abusing their rights and generally making everybody miserable. Chinese Communist Party looked at that and said, okay, we can't have that part where we get out of power, right? That doesn't work for us. But we still want and honestly need the increase in productivity and the increase in standard of living that comes with a little bit of capitalism. They wanted economic capitalism, the free market forces. They did not want the political free market forces, right? Freedom of thought, freedom of association, right to free expression, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't want any of that. So, what to do? Well, here in the US, again, in the past few decades, China gets most favored nation trade status, blah, 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 blah. We believed that while we were importing goods from China that they produce relatively inexpensively, we could export to them freedom, right? We could, hey, look, they have jobs, they're making more money, and who are they? They're selling it to these people. That these people have ideas that we could relate to them, and we can bring them up. No different than what happened in Eastern Europe. Ah, great idea, right? Great theory. Failed. Failed utterly. Unless you had any doubt on the matter. When Hong Kong reverted to mainland Chinese rule, yeah, like the Chinese Communist Party had the opportunity to demonstrate that they really weren't the big bad, authoritarian repressive regime that was responsible for Tiananmen Square, and they blew it. And they can't help themselves. They went full tyrant mode and made people's lives yet again miserable. which is a shame and a crime and disgusting and aberrant. But commies, what do you want? So yeah, the theory of we import goods from them, we export freedom to them, failure. All right. Where are we now in this relationship? What are the tensions? Well, there are some tensions because look, China's got some stuff going for it. It's also got some drawbacks. Big thing. Look, China's a nuclear power. Actually, has been for some time. But over the past several years, they've done a lot with their manned space program. Now, you may, well, manned space program. Man, that's pretty cool, right? Yeah, people up in orbit. It's not about exploration. I don't care what they say. Much as when the U.S. in the post World War II environment was doing, getting our nuclear weapons together, and obviously, the space race and putting people into orbit. Let me tell you something. If you haven't put this together, you really should. This has everything to do with flexing on the world and demonstrating that you can put a nuclear weapon anywhere you want, anytime you want. It's just as simple. If you have the rocket big enough to put a capsule that has a human being, the life support to sustain that human being, the guidance systems, the thrusters and fuel and oxygen tank, and everything you need to keep an astronaut alive in space and orbit the Earth. That means you have a rocket big enough with enough payload capacity to put a nuclear weapon anywhere on the world. That's what it means. That's the flex. Now you can couch that in, it's exploration, try to harken back to, Magellan or what. No, 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 no. It's a flex. Okay. And the people that are involved in foreign policy and the military minds around the world know that. Okay. You can say whatever you want. They understand the implicit threat that that is. So, China's got nukes. China can put them anywhere they want, anytime they want. That's just reality. Now, what are China's problems? Well, of course, obviously, China has a lot of other things going for it, but some of those also have problems associated with them. So, big problem number one that China's got, they're a net food importer. They got a big population and they only have so much land that they can farm. Yes, they've got a lot of land, but not all of it's productive. They grow food. They grow lots of crops, and actually, not all their crops are even food crops. Some are cash crops. Like for instance, tobacco. China's a huge producer of tobacco. Why? Well, it's a cash crop. You sell it, take the money, buy food. It can actually be a very productive use of that land. Okay, but China's a net food importer. They import more food than they export, and they have to in order to feed their population, which is huge. This is obviously problematic for them if they get into a situation where they alienate the rest of the world, or even a decent chunk of the rest of the world. Like, oh, I don't know, the USA. We feed the world. We grow tons of food. We export lots and lots of food. And they buy a lot of it in China. Another problem China has is they manipulate their currency. Now, they do that for obvious reasons. By keeping the yuan relatively weak compared to the rest of the world, they can make their exports cheaper and therefore more attractive. They can make foreign investment into China more attractive. And these are good things for a country that wants to be exporting a lot of stuff and wants foreign capital flowing into it. Okay. So they do this on purpose. They've been doing it for some time, but it is a problem. Additional problems they've got, they have an aging population. The whole one child policy has some side effects. One of those side effects is that the average age in China, especially of working people, is going up. This is a problem. Like we here in the US concern ourselves greatly looking at the Social Security system. What are we going to do? There's fewer and fewer people working and putting into Social Security as compared to the number of retirees who are collecting Social Security. Well, in China, that problem is magnified. This is a bad thing for them. Okay. Now you might think because of that, wow, I bet every young person in China has a job. Mm-mm, mm-mm. You'd like to think that. It would make sense, but counterintuitively, it ain't so. China actually has a very substantial youth unemployment problem. 20-ish percent of their young people are unemployed. And that's a big problem because, look, uh, unemployed young people cause, well, let's be nice about it, call it social unrest. That social unrest could be multifaceted. It could be crime, right? If you don't got a job, and you're 20 odd years old and you need to be able to, get put food on the table for your honey and, whatever munchkins you got, you're going to steal it, right? You're going to engage in crime, maybe organized crime, whatever, right? You're going to do something legal or otherwise to do what you got to do. And then of course there's the other end of it, which is some young people who maybe you're, when you have 20+% unemployment, not everybody that's unemployed has, a limited skill set. There are probably some very, very smart, very well educated, very talented people that just, didn't get lucky enough to get a job. Okay, well, those people are going to be pissed. And this is where revolutionaries come from, right? You have dissatisfied youth that have skills and organizational talent and drive, but your economy couldn't harness them. That's a problem. That's a big problem, especially to an authoritarian regime. And look, even the ones that have jobs, a lot of them are going to be underemployed, right? Because, well, all the good jobs are going to the older workers. And so maybe you've got somebody that has a job, but it's a garbage job where they're not getting paid very well at it because, well, if you raise too much of a stink, they'll kick you out and grab one of those 20% that ain't got no job. So it applies, wage pressure, downward wage pressure on the young people, even the ones that have jobs. Lots and lots of problems here. There is a bonus, though, associated with this, at least if you're a Chinese Communist Party elder, one of the ruling class. It's amazing how communist classless societies seem to have a ruling class every time. It's just weird. But what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now? It's a war of attrition, isn't it? Now, a war of attrition is awful and terrible, and bloody and savage and disgusting and aberrant. But if you're a heartless elder of the Chinese Communist Party, hey, I got this 20% youth unemployment problem. If we end up engaged in a long, drawn out, bloody attritional war, that harkens back to World War One or even the modern Russo Ukrainian war, that might actually solve a problem for them. The problem of their youth unemployment. After all, that 20 odd percent of young people that are unemployed are not contributing to the system. In fact, they're burdens on the system, right? Why you draft them, send them off to war, and a whole bunch of them get killed. Hey, what do you care? Problem solved. And you got some national glory, you conquered some territory, whatever. Hey, great. Now, again, that's aberrant and horrible and awful, but you have to remember, this is something very, very important. We're going to say this more than once in this conversation here. They don't think like we do. Okay. Very, very important. Like it was in the Korean War back in the 1950s, which the Chinese Communist Party sent their volunteers into the Korean War on behalf of the North Koreans to do human wave attacks. That tends to give one the opinion that valuing individual human life not high on the priority list. Hmm. Maybe their own, but certainly not of the average man or woman in China. So, problem. Youth unemployment's a problem, but it does have some side effects that can be very disheartening to the rest of the world. Additionally, because of their repressive, authoritarian, tyrannical regime, they have to do a whole bunch of censorship. And look, in the modern digital age with the internet and social media, this is hard. Not impossible, though. And the Chinese Communist Party has actually done an awful lot of censorship in order to keep people from being able to coordinate with each other, which is very, very important. Because look, if you've got a little region, a rural region over here, A, and region B and region C, and they're all pissed off for whatever reasons with the government, if they ever get together and coordinate when to rise up against the Chinese Communist authoritarian regime, that may be too much for them to handle. But if they are segregated, if they're kept separate, if they don't know what's going on in the world, well, who benefits? Obviously, the party in power benefits greatly, right? And they can repress region A, they can repress region B, and then they can repress region C, which they could never do all at the same time, but they can do them one. It's divide and conquer, is what it is, right? The Chinese Communist Party has actually done a pretty good job of figuring out how to censor the internet. If you've ever been to China, you'll know there are some websites you just can't go to. Not, can't access them because that's the way the communists want it. So again, this is a problem because people do want to know what's going on in the world. They do want to know what's going on in the next, province over, whatever. And the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want that to occur, and they have developed techniques and tactics to keep that from happening. Obviously, China wants to add territory. They want to expand. They want to conquer. And the one we hear about often, the ones most commonly talked about, is Taiwan. Okay. A lot of attention gets paid to that, and rightly so. But don't fool yourself into thinking that's the only place they're interested in. In fact, China invaded Vietnam once upon a time. Probably didn't hear that in your history lessons, did you? But they did. Look it up. Additionally, look, Eastern Asia in general has a lot of mineral resources. And if you were Vladimir Putin sitting there in Moscow, yeah, you're kind of busy in Ukraine, but you'd be smart to keep one eye looking east because there's nothing to say that the Chinese communists may not decide to stab you in the back and go up to the eastern part of Russia and just grab up a whole bunch of territory that is rich in minerals because they can, because they think you're weakened now by your war with Russia, et cetera, and that you've become a pariah nation. Oh sure, they're helping Russia today. What about tomorrow? And it's not just there. I mean, look, China's obviously done a lot around the world with various ports that they want to have access to, and so forth and so on. In Africa, trying to get access to mineral rights in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. They have expansionist and imperialist tendencies. And yes, the culture in China is different. And again, that is way, way beyond the scope of this conversation, other than to just generally remind you they don't think like we do. The concept of saving face is very, very alien to the Western mind, but it is something to consider when dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, especially. Um, Threatening them is not going to get them to back down. It's going to get them, in all likelihood, to retaliate so that they save face. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to seem weak. That may not make sense to you, but it doesn't have to. You have to understand the way they approach a situation. You got to get outside of your own frame of reference. You got to get outside of your own perspective and look at it from other people's perspective, and not just from where they live, but also the culture in which they were raised, the stories that were told, in their own society, right? We grew up in a society where the stories of the Minutemen were important, right? What's it like to grow up in mainland communist China? Very different background. Look, people are people, universal truth, but different cultures produce different perspectives, and you're a fool to not understand that. Okay, that was a whole bunch of background, and quite frankly, even that was grossly oversimplified. But how does this all play into the tariffs and the trade war and that whole situation that's going on right now? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is Donald Trump doing this? Well, look, he put tariffs on a whole bunch of countries, not just China, but some, as it regards China, were more than others. Why? Reason number one, and this is one of the ones that is publicly stated, is to right the trade imbalance. As we talked about at the very beginning, the US and China have a trade imbalance. It is the US's largest trade imbalance with any nation on earth. That needs to be rectified. So, this is partially, partially the reason we're doing this. It's not the only reason. An additional reason we're doing it is to decouple from sole source Chinese goods. Look, if COVID-19 taught you nothing else, it should have taught you that being dependent upon a single foreign source for, oh, I don't know, pharmaceuticals, PPE, electronics, whatever, could be bad. And look, that especially if you end up in a tussle with them, or they end up in a tussle with one of your allies, and you decide that you can't trade with them anymore. Where are you going to get your insulin from? Where are you going to get your antibiotics from? Where are you going to get whatever from? Right? Where are you going to get your iPhone from? Your chips, your solar panels, you name it. Where are you going to get it? So decoupling from sole source Chinese goods, very, very important, is a lesson we all should have internalized by now. That doesn't get said out loud very often, but it is definitely true. Additional reason, and this goes towards really all of them, all the tariffs on all the countries, is this is an attempt to increase a revenue source to the US government. And this is, again, a publicly stated goal that historically is valid. In modern times, it is somewhat untested. Now, you may say, wait a second, Doug, Trump put some tariffs on China in his first term. Yeah, he did. And there was some tit for tat with that. And then, in late 2019, China devalued the yuan because of the tariffs, and the whole thing got real messy. But what happened? That was, remember, I said late 2019. What happened in the beginning of 2020? Oh, yeah, COVID. And then everybody's eyes off the ball, right? So, this whole using tariffs as an attempt to increase revenue, partially successful in the first term of Trump, but also, again, attention taken off of it. Now we're doing more, and and look, this is, again, historically very satisfactory, very normal for the USA, the federal government, to make money off tariffs. But this is the modern day where international trade is significantly more common than it was, in the 1700s, 1800s, even the early 1900s. Yes, look, America's always been a trading nation, always. Okay, but it's more and more common now to be able to purchase things easily from China or from Europe or from wherever for the average consumer. That didn't always used to be the case. So we'll see how that works. But there's another aspect to this that doesn't get talked about, but I think is really one of the big reasons why, again, we're talking about uncomfortable truths here. We're talking honestly about things that are not discussed honestly enough. And that is, this is an attempt to put some economic pain on the Chinese masses. They say, Doug, gee, that's not very nice. The Chinese Communist Party is in power, as any government is in power, either through the approval of the people or at least through the acquiescence of the people. They are not sufficiently angry to throw them off. And look, there's kind of a deal with the devil here. The Chinese Communist Party has basically said, look, you have no political freedoms. You have no First Amendment rights. You have no freedom of association, no freedom to assemble. No, you don't get to redress the government for grievances. But the deal is, they will keep the peace and keep you from starving. Now, that's not a very nice deal. That is literally a deal with the devil, but generally works out. Generally, unless, of course, you're one of the unfavored minorities that ends up in concentration camps and all kinds of other horribleness. So we put tariffs on Chinese goods. Obviously, that's going to drive up costs for consumers in America. But the Chinese, not wanting to appear weak, the Chinese Communist Party, not appearing wanting to appear weak, not wanting to be embarrassed, what'd they do? They turned right around and slapped tariffs on us. Now, if you listen to CNBC or the mainstream media in general, they'll say, "Oh, this is terrible and horrible and awful and woe is us." Right? It's gonna be bad for America. It's bad, 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 bad. Here's the trick. What's the big thing that we export to China? Oh yeah, food. Remember they're a net food importer, right? Yeah, yeah. They get food from us. So what do they got to do in order to hit us back? They got to slap tariffs on our agricultural products. And in fact, they did this in the first Trump's first term too. And you may recall that Trump, offered some subsidies to American farmers and so forth in order to make up for it. Okay, fine. But who does it hurt? It hurts the Chinese consumer. And everybody eats, okay? They are a net importer of food. They don't have enough food. We feed them. Their own government hitting back at us is making food more expensive for their own people. Now that's a delicious little bit of economic jujitsu right there. They're making it harder for their own people to buy groceries. And yeah, look, we're going to feel some pain as a result of that, but they're going to feel a whole lot more. The truth of the matter is, what this is all getting to, this very long and drawn out video, is pointing out that China needs us a lot more than we need them. Do we need China? Yes, we do. Does China need us? Oh, yeah, a lot more. Okay. So if we've got tariffs on their goods and they got tariffs on our food, look at what happens here. There's a combo effect. Our tariffs on their goods can cause employment to decrease, unemployment to increase. There's no reason to be running 3 shifts at the factory if Americans ain't buying it because it's too expensive, right? So now people are laid off. People got no jobs. Youth unemployment gets worse. Remember we talked about that? At the same time, the food that people need to get is more expensive for them. Again, if you're an oppressive, tyrannical, authoritarian regime that doesn't like people mouthing off, this is a bad combination for you because unemployed, hungry people are literally the recipe for a revolution. That is literally like tailor made to cause an uprising and cause headaches for the people in power who, if they're very, very stubborn, may end up at the wrong end of some extremely, extremely unpleasant acts. Or they may decide that the pressure is bad enough that they need to change their approach before they end up, you know, Mussolini or whatever. So there's one additional point here, because look, probably it's not going to get to the point where there's starving masses in China, although there have been famines in China in living memory. Probably it won't get that bad, and frankly, I hope it doesn't. Right? I don't want to see people starve. It's wherever there. That's not a good thing. I think what is being demonstrated here is to give China a taste, just a wee little nip of the drink they will be forced to consume if they decide to get started with a shooting war over Taiwan or Eastern Asia or wherever. If they decide to get froggy and they look at their youth unemployment problem and say, hey, we can afford to take a million or two casualties. What do we care? Solves the problem for us. Yeah, let's go ahead and invade Taiwan. If they do that, their international trade is going to get shut down largely, right? We're going to shut it down. We're going to stop buying goods from them immediately. We're going to stop exporting food to them immediately. And it's going to be very drastic, very drastic. Doing it this way is giving them a preview. It's like a movie trailer. Hey, this is what'll happen, only 10 times worse if you decide to get froggy and start popping off over Taiwan. Okay? You think it's bad now? It's going to get way worse. And it'll get so bad that you, the Chinese communists, will not be able to stay in power. And at the end of the day, any authoritarian regime, what do they want? Want to stay in power. That's the trick. If we make it too uncomfortable for them, it's that old saying, you can make a throne out of bayonets, but it's not comfortable to sit on it for very long. If we make it too uncomfortable, they won't be able to stay in power. If we show them that we can make it uncomfortable, they may decide to pursue a different tack, and that would be to everybody's benefit. So, in summary, having a trade war with China is way preferable to a shooting war. Because again, this is a nuclear power that can put a nuke anywhere they want. You just need to accept that, okay? So, a shooting war with them could go very badly, very, very badly. We don't want that. A trade war, far more preferable. We could teach them the consequences of their poor behavior before they go and do something irreversibly stupid. That said, the result of this trade war, still uncertain. Heck, we're in the opening week of it, right? We don't know how this is all going to go. We don't know how it's going to end. Lots of things can happen. There's a bunch of variables here, a lot of parameters in play. At the end of the day, look, I do prefer free trade. I'm not a huge tariff guy. But here's the trick, like a lot of ideals, getting there is a lot harder than just a unilateral declaration. Look, we could eliminate every tariff we have. And look, before Trump came along, essentially we had extraordinarily low tariffs against just about every nation. Somehow that didn't make them free traders, though, did it? No. So at this trade war, yes, we're using tariffs. Tariffs are a tool. They're a tool to get certain ends. It's a means to an end. And preferably, when this is all said and done, hopefully we will enter into a period of more openness with China, a time where they deal with us openly and freely rather than through these authoritarian, top down, repressive means that are frankly unfair and bad for their people and bad for the international stage in general. And if that is the outcome of this war, which I do believe is what Trump is ultimately aiming for, that will rebound to the benefit of both nations and the world in a huge way. Again, I am Doug with Tusk Consulting, tuskconsulting at gmail.com, tuskconsulting at gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. See you next one.